Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. I am very pleased to be joined by Jeff Deehan with Dymaxion Development, who is a developer in Lansing, Michigan, and has developed also all sorts of different asset types, including multifamily, some self-storage, some industrial, and I even read that some community master planning and in one of the articles I read. So tons to jump into on the development side. First, Jeff, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chad.
Very excited to jump into this. I read that you were a big SimCity fan when you were a kid, and that was the impetus to become a developer. Was it a straight line like that, or were there a few curves in the way?
Yeah, no, I think as funny as it is, that was like my favorite video game growing up, and I think I accidentally just learned how to play it in real life. So there's definitely some truth to that, and I played around with a few entrepreneurial endeavors when I was younger, but really ultimately just like to play with the built environment and do kind of what that game is in real life.
So I want to jump into a number of different ideas that I have to ask you about how development works and how you find a development and all the process in general. But even just to start, what does an average day look like for you as a developer?
Um, my days are pretty dynamic because we're involved in development, construction, and management and long-term holding of assets. So every day I come to the office and I'm dealing with legacy problems as well as new problems that we're creating. So it's always different, and I like that. So um, I have a great team here, and we're just solving problems all day, every day.
Is everything that you do in Lansing?
Yeah, we've taken a really market specific approach. So rather than focus on a specific asset class or a specific business model, our kind of idea is we're going to be the master of a particular market. So I call it mid Michigan area. So about 100-mile radius from where we live. That's where we work. And um, really, every day, I'm just trying to understand the interplay between all of these different real estate assets, and how do the apartments that we're building affect the workforce that's going to be available for industrial building that we're building or own, for example. So spend a lot of time just understanding and trying to adapt the whole system rather than a particular class inside of the system.
Yeah, it's a interesting approach because you're right. I think a lot of people do just focus on one. So they might just become a multifamily specialist or they become an industrial specialist. But I like the approach of being an expert in one market and then identifying opportunities because it all is interrelated. If you have more people coming into the city because there's more work or there's a new company that's entering it, that there's interplay between all those. So I think that's very fascinating. How do you figure that out? So is it population growth first, and then you start looking at where they're going to go for jobs, and you identify what buildings would need to be built to accommodate that, or is it job announcements first, and then the population comes? What's the, I guess, the triggering thing for you to say, okay, this could be a development idea?
We usually come into it backwards, right? So we look at the community and we say, where's there a problem or where should something be improved, right? It typically comes, from an opportunity to access a piece of real estate, whether it's vacant land or an unused or not used to its highest and best use parcel or building. And then we start imagining, with everything else that we know about the market, how could we improve that section or that property, and that often grows into a mini master plan of a whole region or system around that particular real estate asset. So in the Midwest, we've never had like stellar population growth numbers or stellar job growth numbers. It's always been a pretty vanilla market. So unlike other areas of the country where you're kind of chasing around these spikes, here it's more of putting things back into balance, and trying to see opportunities other people don't see.
Yeah, yeah, well said. Because you're right, there are some areas that will have a lot of growth, and then there will be areas that are more flat. So the different challenges in both markets. One question that I'd have is on the development cycle. I'm guessing a lot of projects that you enter into are 3-year cycles, maybe give or take. Maybe they're 2 years, maybe they're 4 years, but it's a longer development cycle. I think what a lot of people don't appreciate about development is that you essentially have no revenue coming into that investment until there's some sort of exit. And that could be buying land, doing the development, leasing it up, or selling it. That if that's a 2 or 3 year process, you don't have any revenue coming in. So it's you almost have to predict what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years. How what's how do you handle that as a developer, knowing that you're not going to have any revenue for 2 or 3 years on that project, and you've got to make assumptions on what the market is going to be like in 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've built our business in such a way that we're really look at everything from a long-term perspective. So we built a pretty stable portfolio of properties that carry us, right? So as a developer, we're not beholden to fee income. We're not beholden to building something just for an exit. Our typical exit looks like a property stabilization and a capital event in the form of a refinance.
Hmm.
So, we have regular cash flows from our performing properties, and we don't always succeed, but we try to stay within the lane of developing things that we can tolerate within our kind of fixed budgets, so that we're not really putting ourselves out there and over leveraging ourselves to where we have a huge carry on something that we can't tolerate with our existing cash flows.
Yeah, and I think that's an important lesson for anyone that's listening, that's thinking about doing a development, is having some cash flow coming in is very important. Otherwise, like
Oh
you
yeah.
got to figure out how to get earn fees along the way as the developer, and then that just adds to what that exit needs to look like as well. So it's tough. Development is a tough game if you don't already have some pieces in place.
I'd say we also do a mix of acquisitions and development, probably about 50-50, and that helps balance that as well because when we do acquisitions, it's obviously a much a shorter ramp up period to being stable than developments. Our average development process takes, from 1 to 10 years. There's projects that we're working on that are decade-long projects, right? So just only doing that is a very, very tough game. And it's awesome. It's maybe the most fulfilling thing that we do. But it's not for the faint of heart. Because as you bring up, we have significant overheads and carry that go with those projects that if you don't have a way to plug that hole can really put a lot of strain on somebody.
There's people out there that don't have a plan for next month, let alone 10 years down the road. What's that one?
Yeah.
What's 10 years out for you?
Um, Specifically, the one that we're working on right now is probably about 6 or 7 years ago. We identified an area of the city that was severely underutilized, that was kind of destroyed by a highway construction in the 50s, and tons of surface parking, and really just like if you look at it from space, for an urban core was pretty embarrassing. So we started by kind of identifying what that looked like. We did some master planning and said, hey, we could really turn this around by, adding some housing units, adding, some entertainment venue, adding some commercial space and some light industrial space, and could really kind of create a district, right? So, in a 10-year program, that looks like the planning. Then you have the assemblage phase, right? So we're a year or two into optioning or purchasing properties, and then you're 5 to 7 years into actually executing and building out that vision. So in that particular program, we're in that 5 to 7 year execution phase right now. So we've built some multifamily properties, a credit union branch and a performing arts center is going up right now. So that's a long one,
No
and
kidding.
kind of a legacy project, I guess. And it's kind of crazy to think that we're that far into it and it actually worked. Didn't work, of course, how we thought it was going to work. But we, as the circumstances changed their process, we adapted and found solutions to those changes, and it's happening.
It's got to be a very rewarding feeling, and you alluded to it as well about being able to put your stamp on the city and take an underutilized property that's almost an eyesore and improve it into something that benefits the whole city. That's got to be a very rewarding feeling. I bet even in that scenario though, you probably had some public pushback on it, on what your plan was, or was it smooth sailing? Did everyone just be like, yes, we need to do this?
Um, you know, Politics and public pushback is par for the course. So in that project, I mean, you're talking some fairly complex entitlement issues, right? So brownfield tip districts, state level incentives, things like that, and every step along the way, no matter how many people you have on your team, you're going to experience some pushback, whether it be from the government itself or the public, and we certainly experience that. And I'm almost numb to it at this point, but it can be pretty stressful for the average person to go through. Just standing in front of a city council and getting your your hard thought ideas and plans and the actual capital you put out on the table just absolutely criticized and torn apart, and figuring out a way to bring all those parties together to come to consensus to allow you to do what you want to do. But that's the art of doing it. I mean, it's without having the stomach for that stuff, you can't pull it off.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point because I've always wondered this too, is that you spend so much time and money, as you mentioned, getting this ready, and you've put so much thought into it, and you've brought in experts, you've done everything you possibly can to put it in front, and there might be somebody that just has a knee-jerk reaction to it that just doesn't like the color. There might be something, and I've sat in on council meetings that have been like this. It was something as innocuous as that. They just thought that it might create a little bit too much shade in one area, so they'd object to it. And they have spent perhaps 10 minutes thinking about the project, whereas the developer has sunk countless hours into it. To have that get held up just because somebody has a gut feeling on it is wild to me. And I mean, I think that speaks to the testament of the willpower. Maybe you do have to become numb to it. Is it just you realize it's part of the game, and you just have to go forward with it regardless. But I think that that's also an underappreciated element of development, the politics and the public, and you can't do a development without both of those.
No, I mean, personally, I just, have kind of taken the strategy that you got to try really hard not to get offended by anything that anyone says, and you have to take the time to listen to their concerns and take an honest, attempt to solve whatever their problem is. So long as it works with whatever it is that you're trying to do. You'll hear a lot of things that you think are crazy coming out of people's mouths, but if you kind of have the constitution to sit back and take the criticism and try to turn that into something that's productive, that's the best way I figured out how to deal with it over the years.
Hmm, great point. So very interesting that you do both on the residential and commercial industrial side, because I think this is a really good opportunity to explore the differences between the two. How would you contrast the development process from multifamily to industrial? And you don't need to get super granular on it, but are there, I'm assuming there's very similar attributes to it, but I'd also guess that there are very different nuances in there as well. Could you describe what the differences are between the two?
Yeah, I guess because we're talking about entitlement stuff and how you deal with the public and the government, that's an interesting place to start. When we're developing industrial, sometimes it's really straightforward. It might be in an industrial park or some zone land that's already in that use, and that's typically pretty straightforward. But sometimes we're rezoning into industrial or building industrial in a place that the community may not necessarily want it, so, at least certain members of the community, right? So our biggest challenge in developing industrial is when we go outside of the lane of developing industrial in a industrially zoned, like commonly understood and accepted zone, and in a maybe more suburban area or more greenfield area. We've dealt with a ton of community pushback, and that's a really big component of that. Whereas in housing, you kind of have a different level of pushback during the entitlement process. You know, the public, you know, just as long as your housing looks nice and as long as there's some element of it that the community believes benefits them or the units are generally accessible to them from an affordability perspective, there's a lot less pushback. We entitled a manufacturing facility last year in a more rural township, and it was like a scene out of Yellowstone. I mean, it was very, very interesting. People coming out of the woodwork, you're changing the character of their community, and that's really scary. So, focusing on the, economic benefits of doing something like that with job creation, tax increment creation, things like that, is often a successful strategy for navigating through that, as well as kind of making concessions or compromises with the community about aesthetics and landscaping and buffering and that kind of stuff, and helping them understand environmental impacts and things of that nature. When it comes to the physical development side, we're pretty good at building industrial. We're pretty good at building apartments. I would say, which is pretty obvious, industrial is generally easier. There's a lot less nuance that goes into it. It's generally a big engineered steel or concrete box, right? With how big is it? What's the program inside? It's not there's nothing goes into that, obviously, but it's simpler than planning like a community that folks are going to actually personally inhabit, right? We do a little bit of everything, but we're really focused kind of on multifamily and industrial and the kind of sub genres within those uses. And from a development side, I'd say generally speaking, industrial is easier. From a financing side, or from a financing perspective, there's obviously tools that are available for multifamily that aren't available for industrial. So building spec multifamily with institutional products, for example, you have much better leverage positions, recourse positions, things like that, and a lot more tools available in the financing toolbox. So where industrial might be a little easier on a management perspective, on a development side, it's more capital intensive, and multifamily is maybe less capital intensive, and is also a little more comfortable to build on spec. Going and putting up hundreds of thousands of square feet on spec can be nerve wracking, because if you don't land that lease, you're sitting on a big nut. And our experience with multifamily is if we build it, they will come. It happens like clockwork. Every day we deliver an apartment, somebody moves in. It's really straightforward. So when we're developing industrial spec, we typically are doing like a small bay or contractor garage type development that it behaves more similarly to an apartment from a tenancy perspective. But if we have someone in our pocket with a long-term lease, we'll go build a much larger facility.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy, because I think the majority of vacancy right now nationwide is clustered in the big box warehousing. I would bet that there's a lot of that inventory available, especially in markets like Dallas and Phoenix, where they could grow in every area, and they added so many million square feet over the years. That's where the majority of vacancy is located right now. Whereas if you look on the other side of small bay industrial or even manufacturing space, the vacancy rate would be much lower. So it all gets aggregated into one number, and I think that number is six and change right now nationwide. But I would suspect that in some markets, probably double digit vacancy rates in the big box warehousing, and it's probably low single digits in that small bay. So I agree with you. I think that is a huge risk with industrial development is not having a tenant in tow. And if you did build a big box warehousing, that could sit vacant for a while. So that whereas multifamily, if you build in a good area and you're competitively priced and it's a good product, I agree. I think that you're always going to be able to find tenants. Do you have a preference for one or over the other, identifying those pros and cons of each?
Um, I like them both exactly the same for different reasons. Right now my mood is I like industrial more than multifamily, but that'll change in 6 months. I like and I personally I enjoy the ability to having the ability to pivot between the two. It allows us, to kind of only fight the headwinds that we want to fight. So when we're looking at development or acquisitions, depending on what they're doing, all of our investments are based in a kind of long-term fundamental approach. So we're not investing in the trends, but we get to benefit from at least not fighting the things that are trending. So industrial from a management perspective, as you know, is a dream. It's a lot easier, being that we do all of our own management. I will say the caveat to that is, especially in our larger industrial, it requires a lot more principal involvement. Even though there may only be one lease on 100,000 square feet, that lease requires my direct involvement and negotiation at a very intense level. Whereas if we're leasing 150 apartments, I might not ever talk to a single tenant, right? The concepts in those 95-page leases and how those get applied and negotiated with major companies are a lot more serious. So even though the management is simpler and the economics of it are simpler to wrap your head around, those individual decisions that get made along during that lease creation process are really important. So it's technically easier, but requires a lot more of my involvement.
Yeah, that's a good point. With you being 50% acquisitions, 50% development, and I'm guessing that probably can fluctuate depending on the situation in the market, but it's just assuming it's 50-50. How do you make the decision to deploy capital into an existing building versus deploying it into a development? Or is that just dependent on the opportunity or the situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Our acquisitions pipeline completely depends on the deals that are available to us, right? So we're constantly searching, we're constantly talking to owners. The benefit of kind of being market specific is we've developed relationships with most of the owners in the area, right? So in being that we're usually a basis buyer there, timing is everything. We might be negotiating on a building for 5 years and we're just waiting for the right moment where that seller needs to sell. So we can't really control the acquisitions component of the pipeline. So development fits nicely in because it's very highly controllable, right? So we can say, hey, we want to bring this much product to market. We make the choice and when we're going to build, and that's so that can be a very stable element of our business. And then in the middle of that, we might get 2 or 3 acquisition opportunities, or make it 0, right? So for our cadence, as we're operating every day, it's really nice to have a project that's constantly under construction, and then be able to deal with acquisitions kind of as the opportunity presents itself.
What does the process look like on a development of taking it from buying the property, securing it, and perhaps we could even speed forward because I think we've covered a bit of it. So you've bought the property, you've gone through the iterations on what the design is going to look like, you've gone through it with the government, you've gone through it with the public, and you're now ready to build. So you have your permit to build. What does that look like on day one? Are you just mobilizing trades? Are you GCing it yourself? What is the actual construction, I guess, is a better way of phrasing it. So day one, what does that process look like?
Yeah, that's the easy part. Once we get to permit, I mean, that's the fun part. It's really straightforward. We're tooled in such a way that if it's a small deal, meaning maybe 50,000 square feet or under, we're capable of seeing it ourselves. If it's a larger deal, we have a kind of strategic partnership with a larger general contractor. So usually at that point, by the time the permit's issued, in the time that we're negotiating with the government and negotiating with the public or negotiating with whoever we're negotiating with, we parallel path the construction process, and we've got a set of drawings. We're already bid out, and we're ready to start pushing dirt. So we kind of just switch into timeline management mode, and we're value engineering all the way until certificate of occupancy, right? So every day we're just trying to make sure that we can mobilize the correct contractors in the correct time frame to stay inside of their timeline, and figuring out if there's any additional ways we can either save money or add value. When you're designing these things with architects and engineers, even though those folks are really smart and capable of their respective trades, there's just no replacement for wisdom on the site, right? So we'll show up to a site and we'll have a full agreed upon topo plan from our engineer, but our 80-year-old dirt work guy that drives around in a bulldozer with no GPS on it will look at it and say, hey, this is really stupid, you should actually do this, it will save you $200,000 and your site will drain better. So we're constantly kind of trying to reconcile that type of that kind of like real-time wisdom and value creation opportunity and value engineering opportunity with our well laid plans, right? That you can look at in two dimensions and think that it's going to be the best way to do it, but there's just constantly things in the field that present themselves that you need to pay attention to.
It's a great point, because you can't just take a 2D plan and make it 3D without some other inputs being required. So how often would you be on site and talking to the different trades then during a development?
Kind of like my workflow is I try to show up to every active site that we have every day. Don't always hit that, but even a drive by or a quick pop in. I like to talk to the guys in the equipment. I like to talk to the various subs. I mean, each one of them has a kernel of wisdom that can be applied to better executing either on this project or the next one. Your steel will show up and the erector will say, hey, if you would have done this, you would have sped things up or saved money. And no matter how many we do, it's always that there's always something that you do wrong during that planning phase, and just trying to learn from that over and over and improve the system so the next project's better.
And you're in an area which gets snow. How long are winters in Lansing?
Well, it's been interesting lately. Traditionally we'd be shut down from November to April. You can build with winter conditions, right? It's just expensive and complicated. But the last few winters we've pushed late or opened early, and the weather's become pretty unpredictable in that way. It's becoming like more of a maybe 8 to 10 month construction season than a 6 or 7 month construction season.
Do you typically follow that season? So, because you're right, you can build in the winter, but it's just going to be much more expensive. Do you typically follow, here's the construction season, here's when we build?
Oh yeah. There's no reason to fight nature if we can avoid it. So if we're building something new, if we can, at least dry it in before winter, that's big. And then we don't need to be paying for temp heat or something, which is also expensive, but at least you keep your project moving. So we try to, get site work and shell completed, before the snow comes. It's always the goal.
No, that makes sense. Are you simultaneously looking for tenants as construction's ongoing, or do you start even before? Are you trying to pre-lease before? Maybe you just have a rendering, or do you wait till construction, or do you wait until you have more of the building envelope up, or how do you approach the leasing on it?
It depends on the size and type of project. So like right now, we have a couple deals, a larger one that's we wouldn't have even considered building if we didn't have the lease in hand, right? So it's lease first. So we have two kind of build to suit deals we're working on right now that basically once the lease language is finalized and signed, that's when we start. So we don't want to really deploy too much capital or energy into it until we have a deep understanding of how that's going to play out. And then we have some small bay and like contractor garage type stuff that we're building completely spec with absolutely no communication with any tenants on the other side of that spectrum, right? So it depends. A smaller project with a smaller footprint as far as building size, we're comfortable jumping into on spec because we know the market well enough to know that as soon as the steel goes vertical, we're going to be getting calls looking for people to lease. Whereas the larger ones, we wouldn't even consider that. And then on top of that, some of the adaptive reuse stuff we do, like we're doing some like commercial to industrial conversions. If those are big, we try to have at least something in our pocket when we enter it, but we don't always. We just did a 165,000 square foot conversion on a Sam's Club, and we walked into that with about half of the building leased. So that was helpful. But then we got in and demised it, and go through the process of searching for the second tenant for it.
So I think that all ties back to knowing people in your market so well, is that not only does it help uncover opportunities, it probably even helps with finding those tenants or finding those companies that want to do a build to suit. How much time would you say you devote to either nurturing those relationships or just having conversations with those people? Is that a regular part of your day, similar to driving to the construction sites?
Yeah, that's probably an hour or two a day I spend just talking to people in the market. We have a network of brokers we work with. So I'm regularly calling those guys, seeing what they have in their pipeline. My questions are usually like, hey, what do you need? Who do you have that has needs, and how can you use us to solve that problem? And so if we can be a resource to the broker network and help them provide fill a hole where they might say they have a tenant that's looking for 30,000 square feet, but there's nothing in the market, we go try to figure out, well, can we build this for them with that pencil? That's pretty difficult right now because of where costs and rates are, but maybe there's another building that exists that's, able to be repurposed or, something of that nature that we could figure out and just kind of strategically, trying to line those things up. So we maintain relationships directly with companies, like local companies, and talking to their real estate managers or principals. And then also the brokers are super helpful because they often deal with people that aren't currently in the market or looking to get into it. On the industrial side, where we're located, we're right in the middle of the state. So we're a great logistics hub for companies that might be looking to locate in the state, and don't already have a presence here. So to reach them, we need to use the big shops and the brokers that have those relationships.
I really like the approach of saying, what do you need versus how can you help me? Because I think that that's probably the temptation on what a lot of people start that conversation with is, here's what I need, here's what I want. How can you help me versus turning it around and how can I help you? What do you need? I think that that's a great way to build trust and goodwill with other people that you're talking to. So I'm sure that does resonate pretty powerfully with them. I want to run through a hypothetical situation, and maybe it looks like someone that's done some real estate development or real estate investing, and they decide that they want to do a development. What would your advice be to somebody who has some experience, not as well connected as you, doesn't have the background, but they want to do a development? What would you coach them on to, and maybe you coach them out of it? Maybe that's even the better play is you say, just, you probably leave this to someone that has the experience, but they're determined. The person really wants to do a development anyways. What advice would you have for them to get them started in that?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot. I try to work with a lot of I think of development as kind of like a team sport, especially in our market. We have more, there's more of the environment that could be improved than there are people that want to improve it. So And the first thing I would do is try to coach them out of it because development is very risky, and if you don't have all your ducks in a row, it can tank you in a second. So I try to have that talk with them, and sometimes through that talk, I realize that they're the type of person that has the constitution to take it on, right? Or maybe they have the resources, or maybe they have, they just have that in their will. And if they do, I try to drive them generally away from speculative development, and into, hey, if you're going to go in and try to solve this problem, make sure that you have the end of it figured out, right? Like, don't go and just build something because it's trendy. Make sure that you or because these headwinds, they change every day. There's a newspaper article and your whole business model is destroyed, right? So um, I make sure that they have a deep understanding of what the end of whatever they're trying to do looks like. If it's, especially if it's an industrial, like if you're anything about bigger than a contractor garage or a small bay suite, like you really need to have that figured out. So if you have a unique relationship with a company, usually it's something like that. Somebody's knows somebody at a manufacturing or distribution facility, and they need an expansion or they need something like this. That's a feasible place to start. If it's a more if it's a simpler thing that's not as tied to an outcome, like a self-storage facility or like apartments or something like this, I'm less cautious in that way. It's okay. Do you have the ability to tolerate failure is kind of the next set of questions I ask, because you start building a building and you realize your costs are greater than you thought they were or something like this. How do you deal with that? Do you have the resources to do that? And if it's somebody that has the resources to do that, I generally encourage them to do that. If they're maybe a younger person that's maybe syndicating a deal, I again am very I really try to caution them against that, and try to steer them more in the lane of acquisitions, because there's just less variables to deal with. Development, when you've gone through that a few times, or when you're partnered with somebody that's gone through that a few times and understands those variables as well as you can, I don't think is that risky. But for a new person, it's very risky. So my ultimate advice, if they really are adamant on doing it, is kind of like taking your first whack at it, maybe a little smaller than you think you need to, just to make sure that you can execute well. I think it's more valuable to successfully go through the process once and maybe make a few less dollars, or maybe not experience the scale that they're dreaming of, but at least like practice the art of doing it, than it is to accomplish something really big, really fast. And I haven't taken that advice in my own life. I've certainly bit off big risky deals, and we've succeeded at it. But I've seen along the way the risks that come along with that, and I've seen other people fall to some of those risks. So generally, my advice, if somebody wants to get into development, is be very careful and do something that's within your means, and don't think it's sexy just to go raise money for the sake of raising money, because that can really put a stain on your reputation that's hard to get rid of, and actually a stain on the reputation of everyone else that's doing it. So careful how you capitalize deals, and do stuff that's digestible to your resources.
I think that's fantastic advice. On the financial side, let's assume somebody has reconciled all that internally, and they're prepared to do that. So they put together a Proforma. Proforma is going to be, here's your day one costs, and then here's your draws that you're going to have over the upcoming years to get this project finished. And then here's what it's going to look like when it's stabilized. And maybe that's a long-term hold, or maybe it's a merchant developer situation where they're going to try and flip it once it's stabilized. Whatever that exit is, it's going to, even if they keep it, it's going to have to be valued to get a cash out refinance. So there will be some long-term projections that you can make on this. Do you have any numbers that you would recommend to someone? And is that an IRR? Is that a cash on cash? on what that should look like, assuming that it's a 3 to 5 year hold? When they start building their model, I guess is what I'm asking. Are there some projections that you think are reachable and also a good target?
Yeah. So, me personally, I absolutely hate the IRR metric. I just can't say that strongly enough. I'm forced to use it, especially when we syndicate a deal because the rest of the market does use it, and our LPs are curious of what that looks like. But our focus is typically on value creation. So we start with a conservative underwriting and assume no growth at all, right? So what has this looked like and what does this look like? And might even hit that a little bit because we don't know what interest rates are going to be tomorrow. We don't know what demand's going to be tomorrow. And then really start to look at unlevered yield on cost and really kind of like base metrics. I want to know if I go through this headache of entitling and building this thing, how much value have I created the second it's done, right? So I'm typically targeting, depending on the asset type and size, hard floor of 8, but most of our underwriting is targeting 10 as far as an unlevered yield on cost.
Hmm.
The bigger the deal and the more structured the financing and the more solid the rest of the factors are, maybe we'd be a little bit flexible on that. But me personally, I'm trying to see how much value we're creating by the activity, and that's the targeting just that is a really simple and I think effective way to look at that. And the result down the line, once you get through the entire discounted cash flow model and calculating an IRR is usually you're within the rest of you're above the industry standard metrics when it comes to those metrics. But I really caution against just looking at, do you know what's going to happen in 3 or 5 years? The answer is just no, right? Like I don't feel that I can honestly say that, right? So I don't like looking at it from an IR perspective. So just how much value you're creating by doing what you're doing in real time. And then trying to isolate and shrink that development timeline down as much as you can, because the shorter it is, the less possibility you have for these kind of externalities to affect it. We had several pretty large projects under development during the entire COVID thing, right? Who could have predicted that? So we break ground on a project, and a month later, COVID happens. You're hit with this incredibly dynamic set of circumstances. The shorter that time horizon is, and the bigger that value is that you're creating, the more kind of cushion you have for those types of things to occur.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on the IRR comments. Anecdotally, the only benefit that I see in IRR is actually looking in the past. I think forward-looking IRR is about as irrelevant as it could possibly be, unless you have a single net tenant and they're in there for 10 years. That's maybe the only way that you could have a valid IRR outlook. Otherwise, interest rates are going to change, rental rates are going to change, the market's going to change, your exit cap rate's going to change, and you can manipulate all those numbers. So someone can just go in and lower their exit cap rate by 25 basis points, and all of a sudden the IRR looks that much better. So it's so easy to manipulate those that I put very little value in a forward-looking IRR either. Whereas it's helpful actually looking back and saying, okay, well, here we had an exit. We didn't theorize this. This was an actual exit, and here was our IRR.
Yeah.
I think that's a helpful way of looking at it. But I agree with you completely. I think a lot of pro formas and projections in general are almost just smoke and mirrors. There's so many assumptions that go into it, and unless it's a already stabilized property, there's just going to be so much variation and fluctuations that you can't prepare for that. So yeah, I completely agree with you on the
I forgot maybe the most important one, which is cash flow, right? So regardless of what happens during the process, whether it's a reuse of a property, a development, or an acquisition, if the cash flow is strong and if it exists, our experience is you can tolerate the bad stuff when it happens. So if the property can sustain itself and service its debt and service all the things that come along with it. If you have a bad year, you can sit on your hands and you can wait for the better year. If you enter into a situation where your business plan is 100% contingent on that acquisition and sale, and you're not looking at cash flow at all, and you're not looking at not looking at it from that perspective, you can find yourself in a really uncomfortable position. So I really like just kind of looking at the basic elements of the project, which are, can this thing perform as we hold it, and how much value are we creating?
You brought up a point a little bit earlier about how someone might just raise capital for the sake of raising capital. And I've seen this myself as well. Someone maybe reads a book or takes a course on how to do a syndication, and they say, well, we're just going to go and raise money and we're going to do a development. Do you have LPs that ever ask you for your advice on other projects not related to yours? And if you haven't, that's fine. Maybe it's just hypothetical. Someone comes and says, hey, I know you do developments. A friend of mine is raising money to do a development. Are there any things that you would caution them to look for? Or I'm sure you're going to tell the Proforma, you want to see what everything looks like. You probably want to get a better sense of who they are. But what would you say to someone that comes across an opportunity like that?
What I'm looking for, because I also do a little bit of LP investing myself, because we're so market specific. If I'm going to invest in a different market, I'd actually prefer to do it through somebody that is the me of that market, right? So that really is my advice, in a way. We're kind of a late bloomer when it comes to raising capital. The first 15 years of my career, it was all our own capital. So we're like the opposite end of that spectrum, right? We started raising capital when we were kind of tired of pushing it all in on every deal, and wanted to, it's fun to work as a team. It's fun to work with people that, have a lot of resources and good ideas. So we decided, just a few years ago to start allowing LPs into our deals. It's pretty crazy when I talk to some of these LPs that reach out to us, how different that is than the rest of the kind of landscape that they're looking at. Many of the folks that I've talked to are considering investments with people that are raising money in their first 5 years of their career. And I mean, good on those folks for going out and taking a risk and trying to do something. It's no criticism to them for trying to put together a business plan and doing it. But from my perspective, if it's my money, that's really scary. I'm looking for somebody that has a deep level of experience and understanding, and most importantly, somebody who's going to treat my money as or more serious than their own. And I don't think there's a magic way to understand if that's the case. It's probably just your own intuition and how you're presented a deal and how you communicate with that person, and how you do your own due diligence on trying to find out who they are. But really, the character of the person that you're investing money with is the most important thing, and which is counterintuitive to how a lot of it works, because you're getting shipped decks and you're looking for high IRR numbers and thinking, how am I going to multiply my capital, right? How do you dig beyond that and try to understand the character of the person or the firm that you're investing in? I think that's probably a little bit different in each circumstance that you do that. But if I could understand one thing as an investor in somebody else's deal, that's what I want to know. It's like there's that Buffett quote that if he feels like he has to have more than a one-page contract with somebody, that's not the person that he wants to invest with. And that's the kind of key thing that I'm looking for, and that's what I try to purvey to the people that invest with us too.
Yeah, wise words. So you're equally as bullish on multifamily and industrial. I don't know the multifamily space well, so I'll stay away from that. But what's your belief in industrial? Is there a storyline or a theme that makes you optimistic about it, or what? Why so bullish on industrial?
We kind of accidentally got into industrial, and I'll start by just saying I've had a lot of fun with it. it's really satisfying and fun for me to deal with people that are involved with the making and distribution of things, and like the kind of things that make a society or a culture, right? It's fun to be involved with people that are producing things, and the reality is, things have pivoted kind of away from manufacturing into distribution and service type things, but there is no shortage of need for um, for space for these activities to occur. And I've through my interactions with with these companies and these folks that are making and distributing things, um, from my perspective, I don't see that slowing down. As things continue to there's all the hype and fear of AI and automation and all these types of things. Physical goods are and physical services are going to continue to be a thing even long past that, right? So I think that the types of industrial that you look at should probably be influenced by that kind of longer term thinking, and that tends to lead to more of a service based industrial or distribution based industrial, which is kind of the stuff we're looking at. But I still don't shy away from the manufacturing, at least on a scale that we can tolerate, because it's super fun and I like being involved in it. But yeah, I mean, I think the average person doesn't have a real window into the underbelly of how everything that they consume or purchase or use moves around in the world. And once you get a little window into that, you realize how big that system is. And if you can kind of seek to understand that system and try to anticipate where it's going to be in 5 or 10 or 20 years, and kind of move in that direction, I think it's smart. It's harder than multifamily because people are going to need a place to live pretty much no matter what happens, right? So unless there's dramatic population decline, which is a possibility, apartments are going to remain filled so long as you have a reasonable management scheme in place. So from that perspective, industrial is a little trickier, but as long as you can see a time horizon inside of your loan term, you're I think you're okay. And right now our industrial vacancy rate in our market is like basically zero.
Hmm.
And I don't see that changing with any of the current trends in the near term.
Yeah, it's
So that's kind of how I look at
I like
it.
how you described it as just you're having fun in it, because I've been in the industry for 20 years now, and I can't think of another
Yeah.
industry that I would have had more fun in. Just all the different businesses that you see as well. The one story that I've told a lot lately is I went inside a space. This is a few months ago now, but the company that was in there, all that they did was service and repair arcade games. So it was like old Pac-Man games, ping pong, pinball, sorry, no, any type of arcade game you can think. And there must have been 50 different of these games in various states of repair. And I just never would have thought that there's a business that just services these old arcade games, but there's old arcade games and someone needs to fix them. So these guys figured out how to do it at scale, and they were growing. They were full. So it really is just a full spectrum of business, and it really does drive our economy. So yeah, I find it to be very exciting as well. Just with the
Yeah,
last
I
couple.
kind of look at like having like a guy as like a form of currency, right? Like if you know a guy that knows how to do a thing, right? So when you're like playing with, especially like contractor garages and small bay, you get to interact with all these, different little people that are performing services and stuff. And you can be in a position real quick where you like have a guy for everything,
Mhm.
you, you know, there's like you said, fixing country or fixing video games or one of these little things. I just know all these people that are doing all these interesting things that I probably never would have known about if we weren't involved in that.
Yeah, I got a pinball repair guy. So
Yeah.
if you ever need a guy, I got a guy for it. Just in the
Yeah.
last couple minutes that we have left here, can you tell me a little bit more about Lansing? I don't know a lot about it other than what probably just the average person outside of Michigan does. So can you just tell me a little bit more about that market?
Yeah, it's a capital city. pretty boring. It's pretty vanilla, which is just fine. We're kind of we have the state capital, we have a bit of automotive manufacturing, we have a major university, and we have a pretty serious healthcare business. So between those kind of segments, there's one's always contracting, one's always expanding, but we there's always a need for something, right? So Lansing's a really historically automotive heavy town. So Oldsmobile has started here, and around the turn of the century, some of the first large scale automotive manufacturing happened here. So we have a lot of cool old industrial infrastructure as a result of that we've got to play with over the years. And like most Rust Belt towns, it felt the pain of the automotive industry contracting, through the century. But at the same time, I mean, we have massive battery plants under construction right now. We have new automotive supplier plants under construction right now, millions of square feet. So, in the industrial world, there's all these adjacent uses surrounding those facilities, for parts and services that support them. So we get to play in that a lot. But yeah, we're kind of anchored with the government business, the education business, the healthcare business, and the automotive business right now. And that's we try to understand the interplay and the trends that those things are doing. Other than that, I mean, yeah.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I was talking to a fund manager who they've got a large portfolio across the U.S. and he actually said that that's his number one criteria when he's looking at a market is it a state capital and do they have a big university? Those are the two things that he says, because that you always got base employment there. They're always going to spend money on that. There'll always be university jobs. There'll always be government jobs, and then that usually leads to other sectors. So healthcare is a natural one. I think any major city that's the state capital and has a university program is also going to have a very robust healthcare program. And then that just spawns everything else. So even in times where there might be recession or pressure on the market, those cities tend to hold their own better just because they have that base employment in there. So that's interesting. I wonder if Lansing is on his radar, because that's very interesting to hear that.
Yeah, it's super boring from a demographic perspective, right? Like we don't have huge population growth, but we also don't have huge population loss, and a lot of the development that occurs is slow and steady, right? So, it's an unsexy city from a fund perspective, typically, which we benefit from because our competition for deals is not with major players, So all of the economic booms and busts that have happened over the last 50 years have been a little bit tempered here because of the lack of expansion during the expansion periods creates less of a contraction during the contraction period. So I actually enjoy working in markets that are less dynamic, or at least I enjoy working in our market because it's less dynamic from that perspective. Very much more predictable and easier to understand.
Yeah, even if he's watching this and he thinks Lansing is an opportunity, he'd never be able to compete with you guys because you have all the local connections. It'd be so hard. That's one of the scenarios actually where entrepreneurs can compete with that institutional money, is by having that localized, specialized knowledge that you just can't buy, that you can't spend your way into getting that knowledge. So I could see why you guys have been as successful as you have been with just that attitude and spending time going to construction sites, spending time talking to people all the time and building those relationships. I can just totally see why you guys have been successful. We're out of time, so I just want to wrap up. I'm going to put links to your X or Twitter account because I think everyone would benefit from following you there. I'll also put a link to Dymaxion's website. Any other way that people can get in touch with you if they just wanted to reach out?
That's perfect. That's easy.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks for jumping on the call with me. I learned a lot myself on this, and just have new deep appreciation for developers in general and you specifically. So really do appreciate your time and jumping on this with me.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, look forward to catching up. Maybe we'll see each other at an event one of these days. I think I'm hoping to come to Michigan for a conference. I think it's in Detroit. But yeah, if I can make my way to Lansing, I'd love to say hello and grab a coffee.
Yeah, look me up, man. I'm here anytime.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks again, Jeff. Much appreciated.
All right, see ya.